Welcome back to Good Morning Oak Crest. I'm Tamkea Harris. Located in Washington, D.C., the Alliance for Peacebuilding, or AFP, is the institutional home for the leading peacebuilding institutions and professionals in the United States and around the world. As a connector of key people and institutions, AFP is a platform for creativity and collaboration. Now, joining me today to talk about the Alliance for Peacebuilding is John Filson. He is the manager for the 3P program, and he's here to join us here today, all the way from Washington, D.C. John, welcome to the morning show.
Thank you. Good morning.
It's great to have you, and I'm excited to talk about the Alliance for Peacebuilding. We really don't get to talk about peace in this day and time. This day and time when you're hearing about wars and rumors of wars and people not getting along, conflict all over the place, peace is really hard to come by. Right. So when I did some research and found your organization, I said we had to have you come in and talk to our folks. As I told you before the show, we have a population of folks who have fought for the flag many times. They have been involved in military endeavors. And so, I'm really excited to talk about this effort in peace building. Now, what is, in fact, a peace builder?
Sure. Well, you're right that when we think about peace, we often think of many images like Miss America pageant,
yes.
I would like, and world peace.
Yes.
or anti-war, flag waving, right. And just anti-everything.
Yeah.
And
protests.
Protests.
Yeah.
In reality, people have been working for many years, for decades, in a very hard science and a fine art in trying to work strategically and intentionally to really understand the core drivers of conflict, whether it's between countries or between communities, between different ethnic groups, between different religious groups.
So trying to figure out why these groups fight.
Right. In order to see what can a society who is experiencing conflict, what can they do over the long term, over the course of many generations, to be able to live in a way that differences can still exist, disagreements still exist, but that doesn't mean that a disagreement turns into a fight.
So getting these groups to really respect each other in spite of differences.
If groups around the globe who want to fight each other respected each other, that would be great. That's a little lofty goal.
Right.
In the peace building world, back to your question, peace building is a very professionalized field of work. It's a science that you can study. There are PhD programs in the United States and elsewhere where you can study. It's a kind of a cross-section of social sciences, political science, economics, sociology, all kinds of things. But the main theme that ties it together is social conflict, why groups or societies go to war, and how those situations, how those relationships can be transformed over the long term to create more resilient society, a more peaceful society.
So is the Alliance for Peacebuilding located in Washington, D.C., are you all an advocacy organization? Do you stand in the middle of two nations getting ready to duke it out? Or are you just researching why people conflict?
That's a great question. We're a nonprofit organization, and we're a membership organization. So we're actually like a trade association that represents a certain constituency of organizations. And those organizations are the professional peace builders. Maybe they're charities that work overseas, like Mercy Corps or Catholic Relief Services that are doing work to help alleviate poverty. Or maybe there are universities with academics that are really studying in depth the dimensions of conflict and the solutions, possible solutions.
So you work as kind of like an umbrella.
Exactly. And so because of this constituency, we represent the broader field of peace building. And the way I could describe the broader field is that if you think about different sort of subcategories of professional work in international affairs. There's diplomacy, there's business, economics, there's humanitarian relief, there's development that try to alleviate poverty. there's human rights, there's any number of things.
Yeah.
And conflict resolution is one of those fields. And it really emerged many decades ago when people were trying to think, okay, how can we work strategically and intentionally to understand a problem that people are facing and really find a resolution that prevents violence and war. But peace building is a more recent evolution of the earlier conflict resolution field, whereas conflict resolution looks at a specific fight. Two groups are in conflict for some reason.
Why are they fighting?
Conflict resolution, the professional field of conflict resolution, tries to understand what is the drivers of this conflict. What do people need? How do we resolve this fight? But later on, scholars and pioneers started to think about conflict transformation. So instead of looking at only one episode of a fight and how to resolve it, instead they take a wider view and look at the underlying relationship between those groups, such that over the long term, keep giving rise to fights. So if you resolve one conflict, what's to say it's not going to recur in 10 years or 40 years?
Right.
Conflict transformation seeks to understand what's the nature of the relationships between these groups and how can that relationship be transformed from one that is based on fear and mistrust or exploitation or injustice and really create a situation that changes the overall dynamic so that conflicts don't continue to arise over the years.
So you never get in the middle of a conflict then? You never, I mean, or are you? Are you the organization that could say, you know, hey, guys, there's no need to fight?
Right.
You know?
Right.
Are you the guys in the sandbox that
Right.
kind of stand in between two parties?
I don't personally.
Okay.
Although that's a good idea. So as a trade association, we're representing this field of peace building, and it's our members who are doing that.
Okay.
So the Alliance for Peace Building is a nonprofit that's representing U.S.-based charities, large international organizations, universities, individual scholars, practitioners who are working around the world on these issues. And they're the ones who are very deeply involved in particular contexts where there is violence and war and trying to solve the situation.
So the parties who are at conflict, do they have to at all alert these sub-organizations that, hey, listen, a fight is about to go down, and we need we need you all to just kind of figure things out? How does that go? Does that even occur?
Exactly. That's a good question. People, you know, you can't go to university as a young person and say, I want to study peace building and get your degree, and then all of a sudden the world knows that if there's a problem, you just put up the bat signal and I'll be there.
Yeah, like,
it doesn't work that way.
Our society, and forgive me, but our society is conditioned a little bit to see the superheroes just swoop in and, you know, figure things out and handle things. And I just wonder, you know, is there ever an opportunity for these organizations in the field working alongside you guys? Do they have that opportunity to know what's about to occur? And are they equipped to handle a conflict before it occurs?
Right. Sometimes. And I'll tell you how it works. Really, the center of conflict happens where people themselves are caught up in conflict. Neighborhoods, families.
Yeah, it could happen,
anywhere.
Anywhere.
And it's regular people who, in their society or their neighborhood or their friendships, they become polarized in a certain way, maybe based on an identity. Maybe somebody who is of a different religion came into our community and killed somebody or did something bad, and that generates, you know, hate and distrust against that person. But just as conflict happens, is centered in the local communities, so is peace building. So the center of gravity of where peace is made is by those very same people who are experiencing the conflict. And that's not outsiders per se. That's not me. That's not Alliance for Peace Building members. It's local people. So it's what solutions do they know of to help stop violence in their neighborhoods? What works? What have they tried? Because believe me, the people who want to stop war the most are the people who are experiencing it every day.
Wow.
And so what is the role that outsiders like us, what can we play? We're in relationship with them. We know them. We support them because our members represent the professional field of peace building. There's a lot of ideas and innovations in the field that may have useful tools to offer. Or maybe there are local peace builders working in a community somewhere in the world that is experiencing war, and they want to know, well, what have they done in this other country that really helped to solve this situation? We need ideas. We've tried this and it doesn't work. We need, maybe there's fresh ideas that can happen. So that's when a role for outsiders can be useful.
There are different, I assume this, that there are different levels and maybe even dimensions of conflict. Something could happen where two parties, they just have a problem and they, want to duke it out. But what happens when you have conflict due to just pure hate, genocide? You had mentioned homicide.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think about countries who have just tried to annihilate a group of people for whatever reason, but generally the heart of it is hate.
Yeah.
They just want to get rid of these people.
Right.
There are moments in history where that has happened.
Right.
Do you all focus on those conflicts as well?
Sure, of course. And this is an element of every conflict, especially armed conflict and war. There's something in human nature that won't allow us to kill somebody unless I see them as less than human.
Okay.
I see them as backwards, or I see them as inferior, or they've done something terribly wrong, and I'm acting in self-defense. These are the things that we think in order to be able to fight. But it really comes back to the idea of narrative. What do you grow up believing? Your group, or your family, or your community, or the group that you identify with. Maybe you identify very strongly as a Baptist, a Southern Baptist, or maybe you identify very strongly as an African American, or maybe you are very strongly as Mexican, Jewish, ethnic, religious, any number of identities.
Sexual orientation these
days.
Well,
when your identity group that tells you who you are, gives you a sense of who you are by telling you how you're different than others. That by itself, there's nothing wrong with that. Variety is good. Diversity is great. We have many things to learn from each other. But what happens is when a group that I don't identify with, that seems a little backwards, why do they read from right to left? Their language sounds so funny.
Why are they dressed that way?
Their language, they have so much in their language. Who can understand that? It's so strange. Or, their religious beliefs, they think, they don't believe in Jesus, or, it's so backwards. And when we start by not understanding the identity and the people of that other group, then we start filling in the gaps that we don't know with assumptions that make us feel secure. Well, if they're doing something strange, it must be because they're not as smart as us, or they're not as advanced as us, or they're just incorrect about something. It starts that way. And then if there's some incident that happens, or some small conflict, in a small incident happens where somebody gets in a fight, or somebody gets killed, or there's the larger group sees that situation and says, immediately identifies with the party that is like me. That person, was just a victim, and they were acting in self-defense. And those other people, they were aggressors, and they were out to get us from the beginning. And over time, that sort of polarized view of us and them grows stronger until you have many generations of a group that's telling themselves a particular narrative.
They're repeating the story.
About the world, about who they are, about who others are. And that story tells them that we are good and they are bad. We are Americans. We are the strongest country in the world. We are the most powerful.
We're pure.
We are advanced. we are good.
Right.
And those other people, you know, those dark people or those Muslim people, or they must be wrong because they're not like us.
Right.
So there's many ways that comes into play.
I wonder, though, so much goes through my mind when you brought all that narrative out. How are we able to enjoy peace without forcing others to be like us?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Yeah.
And say that it's true peace? You know, you mentioned that you have some people in the field,
right,
you know, doing missionary work. My mother-in-law, who's a pastor, just came back from a missions trip in Haiti.
Yeah.
Lots of poverty there. Lots of infrastructure not built. Lots of destruction. And I wonder, as folks go into another culture and they want to help them and provide things to them, how do they do so, you know, creating an environment of peace, stimulating an environment of peace without projecting their culture onto another culture? Does that make any sense?
That's a great question.
Okay.
The Alliance for Peacebuilding, actually, we don't do missions work in the sense of religious missions and things like that. It's not. Peacebuilding is about trying to understand and support people who are seeking peace in their community, to stop violence and to change the underlying causes of violence. It's not about changing the way you know, people believe, you know, religious beliefs or anything like that.
Well, some people sincerely, though, and maybe this is where conflict can arise, is one group says, oh, you know, we need to protect our culture as much as possible. And the only way we can do that is by wiping out people who don't look like us or worship like us or do whatever like us. Or we take over this culture by making them assimilate to our culture, and they call that peace.
Right.
But in essence, that can cause conflict in a lot of ways.
Oh, sure. That's terrific. I could use myself as an example. I grew up in Southern California.
Okay.
A regular kid.
California is very diverse.
It's nice. It's very diverse.
Yeah.
It's also perfect weather and unbelievable traffic.
I love California.
But anyway, well, we digress.
Yes.
Growing up in Southern California, just playing Little League, I had parents who loved me, who supported me. You know, I had a good family. I had friends. I didn't know anything outside of my immediate environment. But then later on, as an adult, I started traveling. I started doing volunteer work. I worked in Ecuador and Central America, a little bit in Africa, in Jerusalem, and I lived for 2 years working for a humanitarian agency in Iraq during the war.
That's awesome.
And little by little, I began to see and know and care about people who are clearly from a different group.
Yeah.
They are not like me. Their language is hard. I don't understand the grammar or why there's so many rules. It's so hard to learn Spanish and Arabic, and it's so hard. You know, the food is different, cultural norms are different, understandings are different. So it's real easy to see those differences. But at the same time, when you connect with people and you see them for who they are, you care about them, you realize that there's nothing to be afraid of. And in fact, they have those differences that may seem intimidating at the beginning are actually the largest treasure that you gain from these experiences, because there are so many rich discoveries to be made in other perspectives. And language, that's a different conversation, really unlocks a culture and to help you understand the way a group thinks more than anything else. It's really amazing.
That's awesome. We can learn from each other's differences and find treasure where those differences are. And actually those treasures will help enrich us individually to become better people.
Exactly.
I love that.
Exactly.
John Filson is here all the way from Washington, D.C. He represents the Alliance for Peacebuilding. He is the manager of the 3P program, which I'm going to ask him about next. And he's here to talk to us about this organization and what peacebuilding is. I know a lot of folks, we had mentioned in an earlier part of this program how you see every pageant, you know, someone somewhere stands there waving her hand saying, and I want world peace. So is world peace attainable? Yeah. That's what I want to know.
We actually, people who work professionally in peace building don't often operate at that level of abstraction.
Okay.
It's way too...
too lofty. I love that term.
Airy-fairy. Yes. We're problem solvers.
I see.
We think violence is tragedy, and we think it's unnecessary. Let me put it this way. We think much of the violent conflict that hurts people, that harms people, that further contributes to this narrative about we are good and they are bad, that then fuels more conflict.
So you don't mind...
We think it can be different.
You don't mind people speaking up and saying what the problem is? Or do you? Do you mind even peaceful protests? But the part of killing and destruction and violence is where you draw the line.
Yeah. Well, this is really what peacebuilding is about. It's trying to understand, if we're seeing a problem that we want to solve, how do you solve any problem? You have to understand it.
True.
Where does it come from? Where does it I mean, in specific terms, as specific as you possibly can get. It's very detailed and a very rigorous science to really understand what are the complex drivers of conflict. We're not about talking broadly and lofty about, we should all just get along. That's not very practical. If we want people to get along, we have to say, okay, why aren't we getting along?
Right.
Specifically,
right.
What's the specific problem?
Right. We can't gloss over anything. Yeah.
Where does this specific problem come from? And where does that, the roots of that come from? We really need to understand. And then we need to look and see, okay, from these root causes of this conflict, what changes, small changes, can people make to slowly transform relationships to become more healthy and sustainable? The way we like to describe it is to use an analogy like medicine. Disease, we're never going to eradicate every disease or every illness. But modern medicine teaches us about hygienic practices. We've learned to cover our cough. We've learned to wash our hands. We've learned practices that help us manage disease. Conflict is the same way. The goal is not to be the same. The goal is not to think the same. The goal is not to agree. The goal is to be different. And sometimes those differences will come into conflict. We're not...
so you take a very realistic approach to this
The goal is not to eradicate conflict. In fact, conflict can have a very creative, positive...
Yes. Good things can come out of
yes.
conflict, yeah.
So our goal then, just like medicine seeks to help us to put in practices ways that we can better manage disease, peace building seeks to put together practices that we can use so that when conflict happens, we understand how to manage it without turning it into they're wrong, we're right, that's it, it's time to fight.
Yeah.
There is a better way to do it.
Speaking of managing, you manage a program called 3P.
Yeah.
What is that?
Right.
There are probably 3 Ps in there.
Correct.
Okay. Yes, we're headed somewhere.
So the 3 Ps are partners for peace building policy. So we're based in Washington, where the center of the government, and my job in particular is explaining what I'm explaining to you to folks in the government. That's my job, basically.
Okay. So give us those P's again.
So partners for peace building policy. And partners because we always work in collaboration. Like I said, peace doesn't happen because one person wants to go and be peaceful. Everything is about relationships. Right. Relationships are either destructive or they can be creative and constructive. And so we work in collaboration with many people on our work. And for peace building, the themes that we talk about in peace building, and policy because we're speaking to policymakers. So what do I do specifically? When our government is discussing policy in Congress or maybe in different parts of the administration and State Department or even the Pentagon or different places where people are trying to figure out what should we do in Libya?
Yeah.
What should the U.S. do in Mexico? Before coming to Washington, I thought that the government was a big monolithic entity where the smartest people from Harvard clearly already know everything they need to know about the world, and they're making the wisest decision. That's not true. The government, there are incredibly brilliant people in the government. That is true. But it's very complex and very diverse. And it's made up of thousands of individual people who have their own views, their own worldviews, their own narrative about who they are, about what the United States is. So it's a lot of diversity. And they can't be experts on every topic under the sun. The United States has grown very powerful in the world so that we are engaged mostly everywhere. But that doesn't mean that the people who are making those decisions are already experts about every single issue. So they actually appreciate when we can bring some of our partners, our local partners, the people who are on the ground in Kenya or in West Africa or in Pakistan or in Latin America, who are working very hard on complex problems in those countries. People in our government really appreciate when people from overseas can provide perspective.
Fresh information.
To help them understand the situation better. They don't tell them how to think, but they give them information that helps them see a little bit more of the situation in order to make a good decision.
That's awesome.
And so my job is to facilitate that conversation.
Okay.
So my role at the Alliance for Peacebuilding is to help connect the grassroots peace builders who are working to solve problems in their own communities, their own conflicts, and connecting them strategically with the right offices in the Congress or the State Department or other parts of the government.
So you're like the operator.
Who are thinking about what the U.S. should be doing in those places to help broaden their perspective.
Yeah. So tell us about this annual conference that you all have.
Yeah.
When is it usually in the year?
It depends. Sometimes it's in the spring, sometimes it's in the fall. It's been in the spring lately. And what it does is it's a chance, because we're a membership organization, we're like a trade association. So we are representing many groups that are working on similar themes that have a common interest.
So you just bring them all together
we bring them
in
together
one room?
so they can know each other, so they can know who's doing what, so they can network, so they can learn some of the latest innovations in our field.
Are these policymakers and organizations alike coming together in one room?
Sometimes. Usually our annual conference is an annual members conference, and our members are non-governmental folks. So people who are professionals in the substance of peace building. And so they come together to learn and to communicate and to network.
Great. So, and I know you mentioned membership before, but this is where folks can take action and be a part of something great. Do these folks, the members, have to be, and you might have said it already, but do the members have to be professional at all, or do they have to just rally around the cause of peace building?
No, they just need to be interested.
Okay.
Our services are really geared toward people who have active programs and who are doing active work in peace building in support of local people on the ground. So it is very practice focused.
Okay.
But we do have many members and people who support this work and the field through policy conversations or through academic study and the broader conceptual elements of what building peace means. And so there is plenty that people can learn and contribute, even if they are not themselves an active professional in the field.
Great. So, John, you've mentioned so much about peace building and the organization, the Alliance for Peacebuilding, or AFP today, located in Washington, D.C., but what should be our takeaway when we think about peace building?
Great question. It's a very serious science.
Okay.
It's not pie in the sky. Very bright, very passionate, committed people have been dedicated to it for more than 100 years,
Oh, wow.
trying to figure out, to really understand the hard science of why people fight, why countries fight, why communities fight, in order to like I said, put together practices that help us deal with conflict in a more constructive way. And it's a growing field. It's you're going to be seeing many more programs at the undergraduate level and master's level, PhD level that offer peace studies or conflict resolution. It's a hard science, and it's something that's as serious as war.
Is it ever going to expand into prevention from terrorism? Those kinds of things, because I think that's on the forefront of a lot of our minds sometimes.
Sure. That's definitely part of it. Terrorism is a fight.
Yeah.
You know, that is conflict. That is violent conflict. So just like any violent conflict, the goal is to understand, okay, if we want to solve a problem, we have to understand what that problem is, where it comes from.
And not stereotype, because of a specific conflict, but learn from a conflict.
Well, stereotyping is not helpful in general, but it's also not in our interest, because that's like saying, if my refrigerator breaks down, I look at that refrigerator and I say, oh, well, that's a Whirlpool. They're just, terrible.
Yeah.
And then you have a broken refrigerator.
Yeah.
If you want to solve a problem, you need to go into that refrigerator. You need to understand where is the Freon leaking. I'm being, facetious, but to really understand where this problem comes from. Terrorism is not just an organization or a person. Terrorism is a phenomenon. And if we want to keep ourselves safe from terrorism over the long term, we really need to understand where this phenomenon comes from. And Peacebuilding has a lot to say about that.
All right. Well, we thank you so much for coming by
Thank
all
you.
the way from Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
to grace us with your presence and tell us about the Alliance for Peacebuilding and what you all are doing. If you want to connect with John Filson and you have some questions for him, do give him a call at the Alliance for Peacebuilding at 202-822-2047. That's the main number there, 202-822-2047. John, again, thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Oak Crest. And I want to thank all of our viewers for watching another great show as well. You've been watching Good Morning Oak Crest, and we've been talking with John Filson from the Alliance for Peacebuilding located in Washington, D.C. If you would like to watch the show again from start to finish, feel free to do that at our rebroadcast times of 2, 7, 9, as well as midnight